Why is it that some people feel instantly better the moment they start tidying up, while others feel a wave of pressure just looking at a messy room? The same space, the same objects, two completely different reactions. What's easy to miss is that these reactions aren't opposites at all. They come from the same place. And the reason has very little to do with being neat or particular about appearances. Loving to organize your home isn't really about cleanliness. It's about restoring a sense of control. When life begins to feel scattered, the mind looks for something it can steady itself against, something predictable, something that responds the same way every time. Organizing offers that without asking for explanations or emotional processing. After a day filled with interruptions, unresolved conversations, or decisions that didn't quite land, rearranging a shelf or clearing a surface can feel surprisingly grounding. Not because the task itself is important, but because it's contained. There's a beginning, a middle, and an end. You don't have to wonder how it will turn out. You already know. That sense of completion matters more than people realize. Every small task you finish quietly signals that something has been handled, that it's no longer floating around in the background asking for attention. Over time, those signals add up. They reduce the low-level tension that builds when too many things feel unfinished. A room that's been organized doesn't just look calmer, it feels calmer because your mind isn't being pulled in multiple directions at once. Your environment is constantly communicating with you, whether you notice it or not. A cluttered space doesn't shout, but it whispers. It reminds you again and again that something still needs to be dealt with. A stack of papers, a crowded counter, a drawer that won't close properly. Each one quietly asks a question. For some people, those questions fade into the background. For others, they accumulate into noise. Not because they're overly sensitive, but because they tend to carry a lot internally. Organizing becomes a way to quiet that noise without having to explain why it's there. This is why many people who love organizing aren't doing it to impress anyone. They're not chasing a certain look or trying to meet some ideal standard. They're responding to how their body feels in the space. When things are in order, their shoulders drop. Their breathing slows. Their thoughts stop scanning for problems. When things are scattered, their mind stays alert, even when they want it to rest. For some, the home also becomes a form of self-expression. The way books are arranged, the way objects are grouped, the flow from one room to another. It reflects how they think and what they value. Not in a performative way, but in a personal one. For others, the act itself matters more than the result. The rhythm of sorting, folding, aligning. It's repetitive without being dull, focused without being demanding. It creates a kind of movement-based calm. Especially for people who have never found sitting still particularly soothing, organizing offers relief without forcing silence. The hands stay busy. The mind settles on its own. There's an emotional layer to organizing that often surprises people. Letting go of objects isn't always simple. Old clothes, unused gifts, broken items kept just in case. Each one carries a small piece of history. Releasing them can feel heavier than expected. Not because the objects themselves are irreplaceable, but because they're tied to past versions of you. Who you were, what you hoped for, what you thought you'd need. Organizing becomes a quiet way of acknowledging change, one decision at a time. You might notice this most when decluttering feels unexpectedly emotional. A pause before placing something in the donation bag. A moment of hesitation that doesn't quite make sense. That's not weakness. It's recognition. You're not just sorting objects. You're updating your internal landscape. You're deciding what still belongs in your present life and what can stay in the past. That process doesn't require words, but it still carries weight. The way your space looks shapes the way you talk to yourself. An orderly room sends a subtle message that things are manageable, that you're capable, that you can handle what's in front of you. A cluttered one sends a different message, even if you try to ignore it. Organizing shifts that inner dialogue without argument or analysis. You change the outside and the inside follows. Not because you forced it, but because the two have always been connected. Organizing is about choosing. This stays, this goes. This belongs here, this no longer fits. Simple decisions, made quietly, often without much thought. And yet those decisions add up. Together, they shape a space that feels intentional rather than accidental, steady rather than reactive. Clear surfaces and functional systems aren't about control for its own sake. They're about reducing friction, about removing the small, unnecessary obstacles that drain you over the course of a day. So mornings don't begin with searching for things that should already have a place. So evenings don't end with irritation over clutter that never seems to resolve. So your energy isn't spent negotiating with your surroundings, but can move toward what actually matters. There's a particular relief that comes from knowing where things are without thinking about it, reaching for what you need and finding it there, not having to pause, retrace steps, or mentally inventory or. That relief doesn't come from perfection. It comes from familiarity, from systems that make sense to you because you built them around how you actually live, not how something is supposed to look.
Organizing, in that sense, becomes a way of aligning your space with your habits, instead of constantly adjusting yourself to a space that works against you. It's also worth noticing why the home specifically becomes the focus. At work, you operate inside systems you didn't design, following processes that can change without warning. In relationships, you navigate other people's moods, needs, and limits, none of which are fully within your control. In the wider world, rules shift, expectations move, and outcomes don't always follow effort. But at home, effort still leads to outcome. If you put something where it belongs, it stays there. If you clear a surface, it remains clear until you decide otherwise. That kind of reliability is rare, and once you've experienced it, it's hard not to value it. Home becomes the place where cause and effect still makes sense, where doing something produces a result you can trust. That predictability isn't boring, it's grounding. It gives your nervous system somewhere to rest, even briefly. Especially if the rest of life feels complicated or unstable, having one environment that responds exactly as expected can make all the difference. For many people, organizing is also a form of future care. They're not just fixing the present moment, they're looking ahead, protecting the version of themselves that will be tired later, the one who won't have the patience to sort through clutter or make unnecessary decisions at the end of a long day, the one who will appreciate knowing, without effort, where things are and how the space works. This kind of foresight doesn't come from anxiety, it comes from experience, from having lived long enough to know how small obstacles compound over time, and choosing to remove them before they become burdens. There's a quiet generosity in that, setting things up so tomorrow is easier, so the next week moves more smoothly, so moments that could have been spent frustrated are instead spent at ease. It's not about anticipating disaster, it's about respecting your own limits and planning accordingly.
As people get older, this pull toward order often grows stronger, not because they've become rigid or inflexible, but because their time and energy feel more valuable. They've learned how draining unnecessary friction can be. Repeating the same tasks, dealing with the same mess, losing minutes and hours to avoidable chaos. Organizing becomes a way to simplify life without shrinking it, to create space not by doing less of what matters, but by removing what doesn't. What changes isn't the desire for control, but the tolerance for waste. Wasted movement, wasted attention, wasted patience. Order becomes less about how things look and more about how they feel to live with day after day. There's an important distinction here between order that supports life and order that tries to control it. For most people who genuinely love organizing, it's the first. They don't need perfection. They don't need everything frozen in place. They need things to work. They want systems that can be maintained, not admired. Systems that bend when life changes instead of breaking. Flexibility still exists. Mess still happens. Order simply provides a stable base to return to. In a culture that often treats organizing as either a trend or a personality flaw, it's easy to miss what's actually happening. This isn't about aesthetics. It isn't about obsession. It's about competence, about care, about creating a space that doesn't ask more of you than you have to give. It's a quiet form of responsibility, one that shows up not in words, but in how life feels when you move through your own home. And if you've ever noticed yourself feeling lighter halfway through tidying, before anything even looks finished, that reaction makes sense. That's the moment when something inside begins to settle, when the mental noise softens, when the day loosens its grip a little. You're not fixing your life. You're not solving everything.
You're restoring balance in the one place where it's still fully possible. Loving to organize your home isn't a quirk you need to justify. It's not something small or shallow. It's a response to complexity, a way of creating calm without waiting for everything else to fall into place first. And in a world that rarely slows down, that instinct isn't trivial. It's intelligent. Are you someone who loves organizing your home? Or do you find it stressful? Share your thoughts in the comments.